Recording on. I know that there are people who are actually come back and listen to this based on the number of people who are visiting the site, which is great. So welcome everybody. I don't think we have anybody new people today. Nope, I think we're all here. Great, people have been here in the past. So some exciting things, we had to switch the agenda around a little bit. So as you saw in my note, we're gonna actually talk about a really great opportunity and a really thoughtful, interesting initiative that we're hopefully participating in coming up in the year and at the federal level from the National Science Foundation. And Paul and Brian and Eric and others have agreed to sort of jump in and sort of give an overview of the proposal that we just submitted and the thinking behind it. It turns out that that is actually right in sync with some other things that have been happening, including not only the Medicaid child welfare toolkit that came out, but just this week, which I included a link to, and you may have seen, is a technical, whatever they call it, a technical letter that our summary, I guess, that defines data sharing standards, or it speaks to data standards from ACF. And it's probably the first time in a while that some new thinking is, not new thinking, but new publication around standards that actually considers multiple different standards in there. So that kind of connects in with the NSF work that's happening, and of course the consent work that a lot of us are focused on going forward. So so we'll hopefully have a chance to talk about that a little bit later as well. But then we can just do a couple of new announcements before we jump into a quick review from some of the, one of the work groups. Eric will give us an update on ontologies and what's going on, cool stuff like that. But he has some wonderful news to share. Eric, are you still there? I don't see you.
Hey, I'm still here.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah. I do have some good news. The IRS just made HSLink a nonprofit. So with this nonprofit change, the company will cease being a software as a service provider as it was before, and it's going to focus on becoming a solid open source offering, containerizing it, making it easier for developers to run it, having more of an open source process around it. And we're working with the Merle Center, which is the GitHub open source group. And through that, we're also looking to work with like the Digital Public Goods Consortium. But anyway, it's just we've been waiting for that to happen since like last summer. So I just wanted to share that news.
Yay, that's great.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks for the update, Eric. Great.
The good news about 501s is you can push off your tax date for like a year. That's accepted behavior. You're filing at least. That's great.
I wanted to make a little announcement about ICFIS.
I was just going to turn to you, sir.
We had our second meeting of the Information Exchange for Human Services consensus body, and Courtney Baldridge, who's now joined us here at Unify, was voted in as vice chair. I was voted in as chair, and for better or for worse, it means that instead of being an advocate and a gadfly, I now have to be moderate and moderate. So we've settled on a mission. We've come up with our first couple of work groups, subgroups, and we've agreed on 2 meetings a month, the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month at noon Eastern time. So if anybody is interested, you need to be a Direct Trust member, unfortunately, in order to participate. But we do encourage any and all who are interested in human services interoperability to come and join us. And the intent of, as I always say when I talk about ICFIS, The intent of ICFIS is not to compete with or reinvent the wheel, but rather to fill in the gaps in the work that others are doing for interoperability within human services, and act as a contributor into efforts like the Gravity Project, HL7, Human and Social Services Work Group, etc. That was it for me.
Well, that's great to hear. Thanks for taking yet on another one. It's great.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for the update as well. So glad to hear about human services interoperability. We'll definitely send you an email to express my interest.
Great.
So one other quick update. I already mentioned that ACF technical bulletin on standards and the Medicaid one. So we'll hopefully come back to that later, or fill it in, or maybe structure a specific conversation around that. Because I think that could actually aid and abet what we're intending to do, especially around consent. So we've been continuing to move the peanut down the field, so to speak, and have busy writing some sort of grant proposal letters, and have also starting to kick off some design sessions with New York and talking with New Jersey, and continuing to reach out to Colorado. So Jennifer stepped forward and wants to be part of it, and have some conversations coming up with California statewide. They have a big new Medicaid whole person initiative that has consent at the middle of it. On a number of counties are trying to figure it out. So there's a couple of different places that are sort of expressing interest in the consent work, and we're getting close to actually being able to sort of move it forward. We're still resource restricted on the PMO side of things. Some of the partners, some of the technical partners are bringing in-kind resources and services to the table, and obviously New York is bringing their people and thoughts, and so there's definitely forward momentum, which is wonderful. And as I think we mentioned, we got invited with Meld and Mayan to present at the Health Datapalooza coming up. There's a lot of interconnection and overlap with HIMSS work and the innovation lab or the innovation center there. So we're talking with Mary about showing up as a presence in some other areas at HIMSS. Let's see what else there was. There's another event, but actually what I wanted to share with you, which was really exciting, is we submitted a proposal last couple months ago for the European Social Network. So I've in the past mentioned them in the past, and they've actually participated in our work. I'm going to just share with you. So they're sort of like the APHSA of Europe, Eastern and Western Europe, developing some mostly in the European area. I think it's about 40 or 50 countries, somewhere between 40 and 50 countries. And so they're trying to herd that proverbial group of entities, not unlike 50 states in the country, except each of them are their own nations. So we submitted a proposal that I just got word that they accepted it. They want to sort of broaden out the topic to be more in a sort of a webinar interactive session, which is super, because we know now, we continue to learn and know that this area of informed consent is not just a domestic issue, of course, but it's a global issue, maintaining and managing consent. And so the ideas that we're expressing here are interesting for them as they think about GDPR and how they implement privacy and security. And I think, for those who want to sort of think globally, it's pretty cool if we can design something that actually might work not only across, a state or a region and the country, but maybe even more broadly. That would be an incredible contribution to making things just a little bit better. So that I want to show that. Jim, you got your hand up, so congrats to you and to us on that.
Oh, thank you, my friend, and congrats to you and the hard hours we put in late at night over beers, getting the proposal done. Yeah, I was just going to mention that from that time to now, I was part of a European open source forum in the wee hours last Friday, ran all day. And while, of course, that was not dealing with human services or consent, there were similar themes around issues of digital sovereignty, i.e. that European countries own the software solutions that they're working with as one. And then secondly, is the rise in Europe of something called EIDAS, which is a whole new digital identity initiative. They also have a digital, the EU has a position paper on digital rights for citizens, meaning how they get to manage their own information and consent to share and so forth. So thematically, there's a lot of what I see in my world, as well as what's going on with human services that can align well, I think, for our presentation. So.
Thanks. That should be interesting. Just got to figure out how to get there. That's all. Hopefully there'll be no troops on the ground.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you mentioned this, but did you noted in their response that they would like to have somebody from New York and New Jersey, one of the other agencies there as well. So.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me of that. I think that would be, it is sort of a contingency in a way, or a strong interest. So actually, we'll talk about that. I'd love to see our federal partners as well as our state and local partners involved in that. And maybe through and with APHSA, because I know Tracy is closely involved as we are with them. So maybe we can actually join forces with APHSA and bring Kathy or Paul or other folks from New Jersey or the federal government. If not in person, I would imagine having a virtual participation would be acceptable if people are willing to just hear from the government.
Yeah, our EU forum last Friday was still completely virtual, which of course was useful because we had France and Italy and myself and Ireland and stuff like that on the line. I don't know if the restrictions are starting to come down now, so it looks like the expectation is this will be in person, but they've got to have some degree of virtual accommodation.
Yeah. Well, we'll either way, it'll be great to actually be there. Be anywhere, just to get out of the house already, everybody. So that we'll see how that unfolds, and we'll talk with folks to get their commitment. And with that, I know we have any updates. I want to give it back to Eric to talk about ontologies in a second, but we've got some time. So if there's stuff that people are on your mind or prompted by this conversation or questions, jump in. Okay, not so much jumping. So what we're going to do now, Paul and Brian and Eric are going to kind of share about the NSF work and the use cases and the kind of the thinking that's going to go into this thing. And I would like it, I think we'd all like it, is as we're going through this to really sort of interrogate sort of the opportunity here in a way, because it is pretty significant. And there's a lot of intersections with the cross-domain work that we're so interested in and sort of pursuing. So Paul, you want to kick it off with some thoughts and background?
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. I'm happy to do that, and also happy to have Brian and Eric working this issue with me. As most of you know, I've been serving as a co-chair of a Tiger team for the NEAM state, local, tribal, and territorial effort to create more of a two-way street between those kinds of agencies and the NEAM program. That's kind of put me into a pseudo-management role with NEAM. And recently, the National Science Foundation approached NEAM with a proposition based on the fact that couple of years ago, the National Science Foundation started to recognize the amazing growth and applications that are coming about as a result of the advances in knowledge graph technology, particularly in the work that's been done by a number of companies in building the capability to create data fabrics as a way to integrate data across multiple domains and even within domains. Some of the work that's been done is absolutely amazing, and it's really worth studying what's going on with knowledge graph technology, because it is kind of a answer to a way to connect the dots no matter what kind of enterprise you're looking at. And the National Science Foundation wants to kind of accelerate interest in this field, so they've come up with this idea of fostering open knowledge networks. By that they mean a network of information sharing that takes advantage of knowledge graph technology that addresses major social problems that need to be resolved, where information sharing is critical. And things, they're at a very high level. They're addressing issues related to things like climate change and hunger and other things, but also more specific use cases. So they approached the NEEM Management Office, which is now, as I think I told you all before, managed by the Defense Department, and said, we really want to have identify some use cases related to NEEM that could become the topic of an open knowledge network. And what they mean by that is that once they've developed a use case to the point that where it can be turned into a project, they have some significant funding to actually make these open knowledge networks and build a proof of concept and pilot projects and test it out in reality. And these are not small, a few dollars and cents kinds of projects. Like one project they did last year with federal courts to build an open knowledge network, relatively small problem. They spent $5 million on it. So it sort of got everybody's attention that this is a serious expenditure of funds about building interoperability, basically, within and across domains. So the NEEM Management Office, having lots of things on their plate, cornered me and asked me to take charge of this. So one of my first moves was to reach out to Daniel and Brian and Eric about doing something with Project Unify and the Stewards of Change initiatives on consent, and tie that all together with the interests of interoperability across domains that the NIC has been working on for quite some time. It also, another thing that ties together here is, as I've told you before, that the NEEM program is in the process of migrating over to OASIS as the managing body for NEEM, to make it into a formal standard, both domestic and even international, and following ANSI standards in the end. So that move, I think, got NSF a little bit interested too, that maybe there's some stability and sustainability to NEEM that they should pay attention to. And so they asked us to submit use cases, and they asked, and I, working with Brian and Eric, Brian and Eric came up with this notion of one on decarceration, and Eric got another one that deals with the homeless issues. And then I went to the IGES Institute and asked them to pull one together that's a use case on that's related to a big project they have on interoperability between computer-aided dispatch systems and how that could be turned into an open knowledge network. But then the biggie request that we discussed with NSF was to just take the entire NEEM model and turn it into a true standards-based ontology built in RDF and OWL, so it could could be more easily used by knowledge graph technology as a way to create data fabrics across agencies and organizations and disciplines. So it's a massive project, and we've now submitted. And the one final one that I got pulled together, I talked with the people at the Bureau of Justice Statistics about creating an open knowledge network that would actually give us the capability to track cases and defendants as they move through the criminal justice system. So integrating data from police, prosecutor, courts, and corrections to be able to describe the flow of information and cases, handling of cases by the whole criminal justice system. So those 5 cases were submitted by NEAM to the NSF, and they're now in the process of a 90-day sprint to evaluate the cases that have been submitted and pick those that should be funded strongly. A lot of us think that particularly the use case on decarceration is a great example of something that could become an open knowledge network and as a proof of concept. So we're kind of optimistic. I had these meetings with the National Science Foundation about all of these use cases, and they got very excited about all of them, particularly interested in the idea of taking the whole NEAM model and turning it into an ontology and an open standard for information interoperability.
Paul?
So that's where it all stands.
Quick question for you, Paul.
Yeah.
When you say the whole NEAM model, and NEAM is like 17 or so domains now, including, I think, NEAM core. Are they talking about creating an ontology for NEAM core, or are they talking about creating ontologies for all of the different domains, each one of which is a little different from the other?
Yes, and I think to a great extent that's yet to be determined, but the proposal that the NEAM folks settled on was to take the entire model, including all 17 domains, and really there are now 12,000 data components in NEAM, and it's still growing, but to do the whole thing as a standards-based ontology with expressed in RDF and OWL. Wasn't just the NEAM core at this point, but that could well be the proof of concept that emerges from this sprint, is to take the NEAM core and make that into an ontology that would be useful.
If we just got a NEAM core ontology, it would help dramatically in terms of mapping between the various domains that we're working with.
Sure. I think that would be the absolute minimum of this project. And the reaction I got from the National Science Foundation about that whole idea was very, very positive. So I think they like that approach to things. So I would think it would be at least the NEAM core and more if it's possible, depending on the funding level.
Paul, it sounds like your focus within NEAM, the part of the NSF initiative is primarily around interoperability. I know that knowledge graphs and kind of like the idea of an open knowledge network could power a variety of other kinds of use cases around whether it's discovery of information, just like being able to access knowledge and ask a question in kind of a search engine or research. Can you talk a little bit about, are there other applications outside of just the interoperability user stories, or are you kind of really zeroed in on the interoperability user stories?
No, you're absolutely right when you say that. And I think the recognition is that if we built these use cases, particularly the broader one where we make all of NEAM into an ontology useful for that, the idea of discovering relationships and pattern recognition and getting answers to questions you didn't know you had using the knowledge graph approach, and creating those kinds of enterprise data fabrics that would be useful in hundreds of different use cases that we can imagine. That it just kind of gives me goosebumps to think about all the kinds of questions that could be answered if we really achieve this. And it's also very clear that the real value in knowledge graph technology comes when you define a data fabric for a particular enterprise, however you want to define enterprise. If we talk about an enterprise being the whole provision of human services or the criminal justice or whatever, you start thinking about all the individual use cases that could come out to improve understanding of how those systems operate, and the relationships between data just gets to be mind-boggling. So yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Any other questions?
Well, I would just reiterate, what the last thing you just said, Paul, which was, ultimately there, from a care coordination perspective, exactly what we're doing around consent is being able to access the various types of information that are across these fields, as we've been talking about forever. Yeah. So there's a direct link to that work, and the ultimate goals of consent and of NIC and Unify and our mission overall. So it's really quite profound.
Yeah, it really is exciting, Daniel. Consent becomes a perfect example of something that, having built a data fabric that would support that kind of collaboration and coordination of care across a variety of different organizations and resources, and providing the consent model across them. It's mind-boggling what we can possibly think about how knowledge graph technology can accelerate and expedite that kind of care coordination.
Excellent.
Well, I think that any other questions or comments about this whole effort? I just want to say again that it's really very exciting to have a chance to influence this and work with the National Science Foundation. Is one key point about this is the National Science Foundation is an extremely influential body, and a lot of federal agencies and other agencies and academics listen to when the National Science Foundation speaks, and so they're a very prestigious organization to be working with about this, and for them to be tackling things that parallel and engage all of us is just an enormous opportunity. So we're hopeful it works out that way.
Paul?
Yeah.
This is Mark Erlandez from CJCC here in Washington, D.C. If there's any way we can contribute from a criminal justice information sharing perspective, let us know. We'd like to be a part of it in any way.
Absolutely. I would absolutely hope you would take that position and be part of this.
Open City Labs as well. Is the end goal, Paul, of these open knowledge networks, is the end goal primarily about advancing research, or like what is the NSF specific end goal?
They want to demonstrate by actual implementation how knowledge graph technology can help improve understanding as well as interoperability of the topics that become part of these use cases.
Got it.
So, and they're larger. The goals, if you want longer range goals, are to solve important issues in society. They are looking at how all this stuff can help deal with climate change and world hunger. So They're not trivial goals.
And I wonder what about if or what or how interaction with the Office of National Coordinator and other federal agencies. You know, I'm not sure if I should think about NSF as sort of the NAM of in the same breath, right? In terms of National Academies of Medicine and Science and Technology. NSF fits in, I imagine that fits in sort of that same category of go-to sort of think tanky things, but is it actually, is a government agency or is it a public-private? Do we know?
It's a government agency.
It is. Okay.
It's funded by Congress at substantial funding, and there's also private contributions to it. But its role is more focused on doing research and fostering research, whereas the national academies are in many cases more about aggregating research done by others,
Yeah.
and evaluating where we are and setting priorities and whatnot in various areas. The national academies don't do that much actual on the ground research themselves, as much as they bring together people who are engaged in research and to try to coordinate and identify gaps and evaluate things that are done. But the National Science Foundation is about actually undertaking projects that improve the science that we have available to help solve problems.
Great.
I would like to add that with our ONC LEAP project, we are doing something very similar to this with health data, using knowledge graphs to integrate health data and potentially SDOH data coming from multiple sources, putting it onto a knowledge graph and then exporting it out for AI and research use. So we are doing something very similar, and yeah, I would like to learn more about this and how we can contribute, because we are developing the technologies to enable this interoperability between different types of data, different representations and ontologies with all the crosswalks and mappings, so that we can ingest these different types of data into a common knowledge graph, perform queries on it, and potentially extract data.
Super.
So this is an active LEAP project currently going.
I'd love to learn more about that. I wish you'd
sure
be in touch with me and help me learn about it, because maybe we can tie some of that in.
Yeah,
So there's actually a session. I think we have a recorded session. I can't remember the exact date when you spoke.
It was quite early in the project, so that progressed a lot. So
yeah,
I'll ping you directly. I can reach you directly.
Great.
Would it make any sense for Eric and I to share the user stories that we came up with as part of our contribution to all of this?
Yes, I was just about to ask you to do that, Brian. I think it's very useful to give people an understanding of, and understand that these are really sample use cases, that this isn't the end necessarily, but this is a proposal that was made with the full endorsement of the NEAM Management Office to NSF as a potential use case for their consideration for further funding. So, Brian, go ahead.
Well, one of the things that we did, this was in discussion between Eric and Sonia and I, was we took a look at our existing user stories for the Thompson family, and realized that in our MITATech 2019 story, Sarah Thompson lost Jameson to foster care because she was caught driving under the influence of medication, as well as having allowed or made possible Jameson, her son, getting access to her medication and ending up under the influence himself at school. But though the phrase in the in the 2019 user story, as a result of charges that landed her in court, as well as concerns, Jameson is placed in foster care. There's no real discussion about any other consequences for Sarah, nor how things improved enough for her to get Jameson back in one of our later user stories. So what we did, with our best evil cackle, or my best evil cackle, was we threw Sarah in jail for that. The new user story that we created for this OKN version was Sarah Thompson is convicted and jailed for child endangerment and DUI after her 10-year-old, it says 100-year-old son online. We're going to have to fix that. He's not quite that old. Was caught using her prescription medications, et cetera, et cetera. While completing her sentence, Sarah completes a prepare survey to determine her post-incarceration needs. And based on the results of this survey, a decarceration plan of action is made for her in collaboration with a continuum of care case manager. It identifies her need for work, childcare, food benefits, stable housing in order to rebuild her life and regain Jameson from state-mandated out-of-home care. And a little later on in this user story, we also point out that in order to be able to share information across all these different systems, we need to have an effective consent service. So if you look at this pretty picture that I've got up that I've shared on the screen, and you squint and you kind of turn your head a little to the right, you'll see that the core of it is really the prepare food insecurity user story that we created. What was it? Was this back in November of 2019? November 2020. I think that was it. Where we had a prepare survey that put some information into electronic health systems that was then was subscribed to by a care coordination and case management system that then did some referrals. But we've extended that proof of concept demo to include the fact that that Sarah is not taking this prepare survey because she happens to have shown up at a doctor's office and been given this survey as part of her intake that visit, but rather that she was in jail. That's that's the jail bars at the top there that say NEAM underneath it, and that it is the prison information system or the prison's healthcare system, depending on which they're using, which launches the uses Smart on Fire to launch that prepare survey, and results in the information going about her needs, her social determinants of health requirements, showing up in the EHR in the community that allows her case management system, the continuum of care case management system, to see that there are a list of needs that prepare survey has identified. And that allows the continuum of care to get a head start on lining up those services and benefits that Sarah is going to need when she is released. And then there's a NEAM release notification that comes out when Sarah is about to be released, that kind of triggers all of this to be put in place, ensures that she has a place to stay that night that she's released, perhaps at a homeless shelter, perhaps in assisted housing, or a halfway house, and also as part of the exercise of putting together a decarceration plan. There's also going to be ultimately a NEAM service plan that's shared between the continuum of care case management system and family court that says basically, here's how, with Sarah out of jail, here's how we are working with her to put her life back together again so that she will qualify for getting her son back from foster care. So this is the big picture view of all of this. And to some extent, it's a little it's a little light on the details, especially around the various referrals that we make for housing assistance, homeless shelters, SNAP, et cetera. And that's one of the challenges that we're going to have within OKN, is identifying the various ontologies that we need to either define or adopt for all of these different kinds of programs and services that are out there, as well as how to map between that and the service plan for the family court, a care plan within the healthcare system, because healthcare is going to be involved in all of this as well. And of course, you know, the work with the jail itself to ensure that there is a seamless handoff between her incarceration and her support within the community. So, and you know, all of this, by the way, with a clear understanding of which pieces of this information is sensitive, and how do we support that sensitive information with appropriate consents through a consent service utility. And there probably ought to be a lot more, you know, double-headed arrows going between consent service utility and family court, between the prison and consent services, between consent services and the various CBOs that are providing support on the right-hand side of the slide. So that's what we've proposed as a user story, and implicitly, though we haven't defined them yet, the set of use cases associated with each one of these arrows will be a use case of one or more pieces of information that needs to be exchanged based on one or more different set of standards. Eric, do you want to take over and talk about your scenario?
Sure. I'll share my
More
screen.
detailed.
So,
Hey, Brian, hey, before you jump in, I said one quick question, Brian.
Yes.
Did in the submission, did we include any of the graphic, or just the words, just the facts, ma'am?
No, we included the pretty pictures too.
Good, okay, because I think that helps see the part of the complexity of it. And just to tie back, of course, you know, that was modeled on New Jersey Inc. With Dr. McCoy's input. So I'm sure, you know, as this develops and it needs to be refined, Christine would be delighted to weigh in. I'm volunteering her time. So.
By the way, if we ever get around to standing up an aging domain, you replace the prison and family court with elder services and assisted living organizations, and you may be closer to having an aging example with this very same picture, or with that very same picture, not the one that Eric is showing.
And the prison healthcare connection will be so much more important.
Yes.
So
you, Eric.
This decarceration scenario that Brian described involving the Project Unify use case people, Sarah Thompson and her son Jameson. This family unification scenario was actually something Brian and I presented to the NHSDC for. It's kind of the Homeless Management Information Systems Conference last year in the spring. And it was something we worked up, not in an echo chamber, but with Hialeah Housing, Diana Morales, and Gio Patuzzo of Citrus Health. And they run this in Florida, this exact scenario. And they actually approached me and said, hey, is there a way that we could make an information system for notifying people about family unification? And this is a great application of NEEM and NEEM knowledge graphs and NEEM ontologies. And essentially, it's a scenario where Sarah's son, Jameson, has been taken away from her and put into the state foster care system because she doesn't have stable housing because of her incarceration that she's now being decarcerated from. Sarah Thompson is needing to find, after she's decarcerated, she's needing to find stable housing. And so it's determined as part of the decarceration process that Brian was describing. So this is just a thread of the overall scenario Brian described. Housing choice voucher would help her acquire the stable or achieve the stable housing criteria to be reunified with Jameson. So we have in this chart, and I didn't put the types of standards and exchanges, but generally speaking, these would be NEAM exchanges through any of standard methods of moving NEAM JSON LD between, that's a payload type that NEAM is supporting between these different agencies. So this could all start off with the state foster care system waiting to find out about stable housing being achieved for Jameson's mother. And they just put out this W3C web subscription to hear about any notifications about Jameson's family. When Jameson's mother, Sarah Thompson, receives stable housing, then they can reunify Jameson with his mother. So that happens, and that just kind of gets put on the back burner. That's step one. Then we jump over to step two. Sarah is now initiating a process whereby she applies for a housing choice voucher to the Public Child Welfare Agency. They actually don't make the determinations of whether or not you get a housing choice voucher. That goes to the local public housing authority, which is step three. So a referral is made. This would be a NEAM-based exchange, as well as step one, which was a NEAM-based exchange. The request is approved, and there's lots of back and forth messages that would happen in the real world that would make this diagram ridiculously complicated. So you've got one-way arrows and simplifications. So then the Public Child Welfare Agency, which is sort of the broker of the housing choice voucher application process for the decarceration, perhaps with the continuum of care in the community, kind of managing the decarceration. Maybe not. Maybe it's directly from the correction system. Anyway, they get notified of the approval of the housing choice voucher for Sarah. She's then stably housed, and then the Public Child Welfare Agency notifies the Family Unification Case Management System, which is what we presented at the NHSDC, which then finally responds to the subscription that happened in step one that Jameson's mother is stably housed. Now they can be reunified. So, as you can see here, there's some person matching that would have to happen, or it could even be manually done if the caseload is low enough, or if the turnaround wasn't that quick. But there would need to be some sort of logic to match the messages. And just another application of knowledge graphs to define data types that can be shared between systems. Any questions about this before I turn it back to Paul? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Yes, thank you, Eric. That was great.
Pleasure to work with you as always.
So these are the two that came out of the discussion relative to some of the work of Project Unify and the NIC, and coupled with the other use cases where the whole process is going to kick off February 23rd with the first meeting of a lot of experts in knowledge graph technology, as well as from the various agencies that are stakeholders in all of this. And they'll be meeting for 90 days to flesh these out to the point of helping NSF understand what the possibility of success is, and also the costs, and also what the value premise is. And then there'll be kind of a consensus developed on which ones to be funded and turned into actual production. So that's where it lies. Any other questions?
I have a couple questions. One is might be a good time to just raise the question. I know that the ACF notice just came out. The bulletin came out. I talked about the standards and NEAM and children's services, and within the context of ACF. So I don't know if there's any particular commentary. I know I scanned it, I know a couple other people had a couple moments. I don't know, Paul, if you had a chance to look at it. Is it too premature to talk about that? Or if anyone has a spurious thought, want to throw out on the table, it's fine. Regarding that document, if you looked at it. And I can pull up a picture of it.
Oh, I did look at it, Daniel, and I was kind of exciting to see that they're actually getting serious about talking about standards in a realistic way, I think. And it was nice to see that they did mention NEAM at the outset of it. But as you pointed out, there's some kind of conflicting components to this statement that, you know, they don't really nail down what they're suggesting be done and which standards apply to which environments. But it's a very helpful starting point for this particular discipline to start getting serious about having data exchange standards. And I was really happy to see them use that terminology.
Well, I think this reflects, open to anybody who's got a clue about this as well. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see as a follow-up to the ACF roundtable I sat in a couple of weeks ago, when just right before that happened, that Medicaid child welfare toolkit dropped, and now this came out after that. And their professed goal is to improve data sharing between Medicaid and child welfare information systems writ large and others. So this seems to be, especially with the new information systems that are being built under the Child Welfare Information Systems Act. It really does, at least it's the conversation. I don't know who owns this within ACF. I don't know if Ken's on the call with us, he might have, is Ken still here? He might have a clue. Because I know there's not like a central ACF technology office, or there wasn't. We worked there, there were two people. There was a $60 billion agency. There were two people who made up the IT department. Everything else was sort of embedded in the programs. So I don't know if that, has changed, but certainly it's raising the question in the conversation. So again, being able to connect the dots between these efforts, which I perceive as positive. Somebody's thinking about it, and maybe they outsourced it to ICF or somebody to do a research project or to come back with some ideas. There's obviously some gaps in this one as well, or there's some questions that would benefit from a discussion. I'd love to engage in that discussion here or somewhere else, if that could happen. Because I think it's having a federal mandate in a way, or certainly an encouragement and enablement helps jurisdictions, departments, agencies, maybe attorneys even be willing to engage more directly in the work. So I just wanted to contribute that, Paul.
I think the thing that really helps individual agencies, and I'd love to hear Christine's view on this, but is the really tying this need to develop data exchange standards in with the funding channel, so that people can really see that there's money behind this. It's not just a wish list, that Medicare is going to be supporting this kind of activity, or they wouldn't have this kind of issue. So I think it creates an opportunity for state and local agencies to get serious about building the standards and choosing a standard and being able to get reimbursed. Christine, what do you think of this?
So I guess I'm trying to figure out where you're tying this into CMS, since it's coming out of the Children's Bureau, with, I guess, that thought that they're going to be able to connect to CMS systems, which are hardly there, right? It's connecting to private vendors of EHRs, et cetera. So I mean, on the healthcare side, the kids aren't in any particular system consistently, other than the, you know, if they're Medicaid, they're in TMSIS to some extent. So is that what you're talking about? I'm just trying to figure out, like, you're talking about connecting standards that would connect them to health, allow them to do data exchange with a wide variety of healthcare systems.
Well, look at this language that kicks it off right there at the start of the toolkit, that CMS is one of the sponsors of this. So it implies to me that that's gonna really.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I hadn't had a chance to preview this, so I guess that's so. I mean, you know, to me, like, we haven't even been able to do much meaningful data exchange within healthcare. So, despite all of CMS's efforts, but I mean, obviously, I'm hugely supportive of this happening, and it's critical for the work that Inc. and all the other programs working with kids and families is trying to do.
Yeah.
So there you go. So
so Daniel, what do they mean by connecting to Medicaid agencies? Like at an administrative data level, like connecting to TMSIS?
Great question, Doctor.
Because they're, you know, it says state Medicaid agencies, like they don't have much.
No, but they got they're running an MMIS system. They were like, Connecticut ran an MMIS system. There was a vendor that supported it, but they had access to 1 million people. They had, you know, they didn't have to manage the actual technical infrastructure, algorithms and stuff, but they had the policy.
So the claims data. Okay, I see Mary Sarah. Yeah. So right. So there's some sort of data warehouse managed by some company somewhere that has all the consolidated claims data from all the different Medicaid managed care companies, which most states are dominated by now. So you're talking about a connection to old and the data that's both old and also that has gone through a claims process, which it's adjudicated, so it comes out very different on the adjudicated end than it looks like going in as raw data. So I mean, again, it's way better than not doing this. It's just, I'm not sure this is where you get the most advantage, because there's no connection back from a Medicaid agency's TMSIS system to the service providers to that child or adult covered under Medicaid.
I think this is what this is suggesting, is that should be a connection between the whatever the Medicaid MMIS system is and the child welfare system and other systems, with a bidirectional flow of information.
So it's 60, 90 days out, right? So
I don't know.
In some cases.
Is it?
Yeah, not always. By the time it's adjudicated, it's usually that old, but it's not always old. And you don't necessarily need the adjudicated claim. So it depends on how you set it up.
Right. But for those states who only have access to that adjudicated claims data, right, they'd have to redo their system.
Right. It wouldn't work in all cases. In some states, it would be very difficult to do. But I'm working with one organization that is looking to utilize the claims data to provide guidance as to which children may need some behavioral health supports that they're not aware of. And so it does do that via that claims data. It's not by any means in front of the ball. You are definitely being reactive at that point. But I guess Florida has an act called the Baker's Act, and it would be a way to support that legislation.
I'm just also thinking, Mary Sarah, are there ways to, through ancillary, other service providers that are funded by Medicaid that feed into it or that are fed by it, that have other information that could benefit from the 90/10 money to actually build those not only the referrals, but also the use of that information, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's in some states, you've got the PDMP, the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, and in some states that's got all of your medications in it. That can be very insightful. That's under the Department of Public Health typically. You've got your MCOs, your managed care organizations. They're going to be doing their own level of care management and have an eye on the high risk individuals. So yes, there are other options to tap into depending on the specifics of the use case.
We were actually just talking about PDMPs, I think last week, as a source of data. I'm looking at my notes to see if I know Ken had some.
It's very tempting to try to use those for a lot of other purposes. Is that what you were talking about?
Yes.
Because they're there and they work. I mean, it's clunky, but it's there.
Yeah, they're being used. Louisiana wanted to use it to be able to track adherence to medication for individuals who have hepatitis C and are on Medicaid.
So looking to see if they were getting prescribed the medication regularly or ever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, it would have been based all on fill date and refills.
Yeah. Or if perhaps they weren't connected to care and then they had another process for connecting the patient to care if those medications were not being dispensed.
Not being dispensed regularly. Yeah. So Jim, you said that 14 states have all payer claims databases, but do you have any idea how many of those are relatively real-time data?
That's a wonderful question, Christine, and the answer would be no. I don't even know if by design or legislation, if there is a window where some states might be more real time than others. I think I'm pretty certain it's sort of a batch 837 process or something like that ends up getting reported to the APCD, but I don't know if that's necessarily a nightly run or if within every 30 days that they have to be reported. It's a good question.
Yeah, I think in New Jersey it's on a 30-day basis, so that's why it's not very useful for real-time data like the example we were just talking about with hepatitis C.
Yeah,
and in New York, I know the APD is definitely substantially lagged and only available for research purposes.
Right. I mean, the availability is super restricted in New Jersey.
Yeah.
There's essentially 4 agencies that now have access to it other than for research purposes. So that's it.
But I think again, we need to be mindful of not embedding a medical centric role in SDOH, right? And building everything around it. Really, it's easy to say. I don't know exactly. We have the opportunity to do something around this, but names, data standards, sharing identity. There's all these other players that are out there. You go to the doctor maybe regularly, maybe not, maybe only once or twice a year, maybe once every 5 years, and all this other stuff is happening. So the data standards work well. It's great to see it happening and then being encouraged and guidance from the federal level. It is still so practically useful on the ground, and we come back to the Bronx and Mammoth County and Colorado, and let's do something, right? Let's just do something. There's so many hills. There's so many. What do they call them in Colorado? The 14,000. What are they? There's a name for the giant row of 14,000 foot mountains or 12,000 foot mountains. Do you know that? Jeopardy question.
The 14ers?
It might be. Yeah, good guess.
No, I
Mountains
think
do-
that is what they're called because
I think you're right.
it's like a thing to go hike them all.
Yeah. So there are certainly plenty of challenges out there. No, but we just need to create some successes, some wins on the ground, as it were, right?
I think Montana's taking an EHR-based approach where they're using Cerner's Healthy Data Labs, and they've built in risk models that incorporate the social determinants of health, and they're starting to expand that. So they started with housing, and they're expanding that out to bring in all the government agencies, the different data. But they are using the EHR as kind of the primary means to pull that data together and utilize it.
A lot of advanced development out west in the Utah, Idaho, Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at Paul's comment and from some of the work I've been doing recently with folks in Colorado, maybe there's a chance there to at least let the legislators talking about it.
So, we just.
They are.
What?
Oh, sorry. Colorado is looking at at integrating the data. They're working on their MPI right now.
Okay.
To start integrating the agencies. And I know, especially with the behavioral health legislation that went through, they're expanding the agency, and they are looking to integrate. And I can share an image they shared with us. They're looking to integrate criminal justice, the 211s, all of the healthcare organizations, and the behavioral health agency, and some of the other government agencies. Of course, it's a long-term roadmap, but it is a lot of integration.
Jennifer, do you have any insight into what's going on over in the 14ers that you want to share? Nope. Caught her off camera. Or off mute. Anyway, Jennifer, we spoke a couple weeks ago, and she, from her role, is again supportive of that and interested in looking at Colorado as one of the consent proof of concept sites, with with all the caveats behind that. But so that would be great, because I know Colorado, I mean, they won one of the OMB innovation grants when, again, we were at ACF. They put out like 9 or 10 grants to do the same work. They're still up on the website. It probably, and Colorado did a roadmap back then. I remember doing it and participating with them, trying to do care coordination stuff.
You're talking about the SIM grant, Daniel?
No, it actually wasn't SIM.
Oh.
It was actually a special OMB award that they put out, it wasn't even a cooperative agreement. It was ACF managed it, and OMB kind of managed it with ACF. And they put out like 9 grants. There's a great link. It's great work that was done there. There's a ROI calculator that Hopkins did with Maryland. We did some work on actually a governance sort of toolkit with Illinois. Colorado did a good roadmap. New York, we helped California with an interoperability plan for the state, and introduced NISIA and NEAM to everybody across the state at the time. I'm a big believer, and I know that Ken had mentioned in the past that revising, updating NISIA, which is what we've been, talking about for a while, is appropriate. And I hope that the folks who are doing this technical bulletin, we are being or already connected to the NISIA folks. Or Ken, I don't know if you got your arms on that still, but that seems to be a conversation worthy of having between the Medicaid toolkit, this document, and then the NISIA and standards work on the care coordination. A lot of intersection there. So I had a couple of questions before we kind of sign off. Next week, barring any unforeseen circumstances, Stefan Konya said he would join us. and give us an update on all the cool stuff that's happening in his shop, which is great. I'm actually talking, yeah, we'll be planning more of that work and his continuing interest in the consent work for later in the springtime. One of the things about doing these Wednesday calls is kind of what do we want to hear about? What's useful conversation? Everybody, there's general direction around many of these initiatives. Now there's this one with NSF, there's consent stuff, there's Unify going on. There's a lot of different streams, related streams, a lot of the work groups. There's an interesting, useful mention. Actually, just the other day, we got a call, we got a contact from the Data Across Sectors folks, Dash, who want to look at sort of featuring the work within the broader Dash community and doing a wide scale orientation to their many communities, which is kind of cool. So there's a big spread of stuff. But sometimes we get a little stumped on what's useful to hear about and finding people who want to speak. So a couple of thoughts. I know we're going to schedule Contera in a couple of weeks. Stefan's going to speak next week. But thoughts and ideas, if we want to spend 2 minutes or 3 minutes saying like, what would be useful? What would be interesting to engage with? And then we can, find stuff. But it's hard to know. I think we're doing a pretty good job bringing relevant, pertinent, interesting stuff to the table. But any thoughts? Welcome to share. So a couple of things while you're putting your thinking caps on still. There's a lot of stuff going on in California with their whole redesign of their Medicaid system and their CalAIM, which is going to encourage every county across the state to basically become whole person care oriented. So it's connecting everything to everything. There's an association of the HIE folks who are trying to help sort of herd some of those cats that are supported by the Department of Social Services and healthcare services in California. I'm sure we can bring them back and talk more about that. There's a big overlap. They've got a huge goal of June 2022 to get I'm going to not get the exact details right, but they want a very clear policy on consent. And they've done a lot of work sort of up to this point in time. And there's interest, as I said earlier, in trying to infuse some of this work into the working groups and into the early adopters in a couple of the counties out there. So that would be possible to kind of bring in other sites like we did with Arlington. There's other places we're in conversations with some of our other partners from Alameda County and from Hennepin County, there's in Arlington County. Maybe the folks at the state in California would want to talk some more. Other ideas and other places that are doing stuff. Looking for any of the ONC kinds of accelerators, like the stuff you're doing there. What do you got? Any thoughts? Maybe it's time for coffee or drinks.
For the next meeting.
All right, it's midweek. Balazé overwhelmed you.
I have a suggestion or an idea.
Thank you, Matt.
There is a health care design agency, and I think he's an MIT professor or Harvard professor, who has like an initiative out about patient ownership of their own data and trying to get a law passed in the state of Massachusetts. And his firm did like a little booklet to kind of educate the public about why data ownership, is important. And I don't know, I'll send you his information Daniel.
That might be great, Matt, when Kay and the Contera folks and Jim and others, maybe that, it sounds like a good conversation or good other sort of a voice to bring into that conversation if that works out. So thanks for that, man.
Hi, Daniel. Courtney
Yeah.
Baldridge from US Aging. And I think there's an awful lot to talk about in the aging space. I will say we're a little unique in that at US Aging, our members and our network are funded under a congressional act, the Older Americans Act, which brings with it its own level of data specifications that unfortunately are decided at a state level. So standardization of that data is a little bit difficult, and the number of data sets is a little enormous. Our network also contracts with managed care, hospitals, and other entities to provide services. So we're kind of a data mess in terms of integration. And also you're dealing with social service agencies, historically social service agencies, whose IT capacity is significantly underfunded. And for some agencies, I would say rudimentary. Some of them are operating off of Excel spreadsheets. Some of them are highly sophisticated. So, we're an interesting beast in the mix. We do have a nationwide footprint, and we are reaching across not only providing historically social services, and I think we like to say we did social determinants of health long before anyone else bothered to care.
Yeah, right.
Our folks are also really working hard to be that social service partner to clinical and healthcare providers and all the implications that go along with that. We're seeing some interesting issues. Certainly consent is one that, I hear you all talk about and it resonates. It ranges from the alignment of data sets between what the social service network has historically done versus those being developed under Gravity and other efforts that don't align. And what does that mean in terms of the provision of service? What does that mean in terms of information exchange? What does that also mean in terms of how it impacts? If you want to align the data, you can align the data all day long, but that doesn't necessarily mean the actual service on the ground will change. And suddenly you could have pricing implications, you can have licensure, training, and credentialing implications. And we also are seeing a lot of issues, I shouldn't say issues. Our networks historically do information and referral. They also do assessment, they do service coordination, and they do service provision. So as we look at this new world of everyone wanting to jump into social determinants of health, at least for the aging population, as well as we have a very large footprint in the disabilities population as well. Many of our agencies provide services to the disabilities population aged 18 and up. We see disconnects all over the place. And it's how do we, one, sit at the table and try and work through these issues, as well as have other people understand some of the unique challenges that exist because of legacy data sets and legacy systems that have sat there for 45 years. Finally, I will tell you, our folks, when they're integrating with healthcare providers, sometimes it's through their own platforms that are very sophisticated. Sometimes they're having to manually input data into an MCO or other partners' platforms. Sometimes it's on Excel spreadsheets. So we are a challenge.
Well, if I could take that as a yes. I'd love to have you come and talk to us and just expand on the stuff you're talking about and give us examples, because you know what, we're all getting there quick, so we better hurry up and make it better, right? Because we're
Right.
gonna be living with it.
So would certainly be willing to do that. I would say give us a little bit of time.
Sure.
You know, we could figure out a time down the road that works.
That would be great. Yeah, even just, just bringing that in. Are you connected, or I'm sure John A. Hartford Foundation is connected to your work? We met with them. Yeah,
They actually fund our Business Institute, which is
cool.
to help develop the business acumen capacity of the network.
Interesting. So just a small world closed loop, and then we'll adjourn. Several years ago, they presented at a, it was a Lutheran Worldwide Social Services Conference in Chicago I was at. And no, it actually doesn't matter where. I actually met them from some other work at Johns Hopkins. They were doing a lot of work with Hopkins. And we connected, and all of the same interoperability issues and challenges we faced with children, because we were really focused on child welfare, totally reflected exactly the same. I mean, it goes without saying it, but it was a mirror parallel universe on the issues. And I remember having the conversation around, but don't you see, it's the same issue. We solve it here, we can solve it there. It was a bridge a little too long at the time, just because aging is so big, and the foundation is so big and they're doing so much. If it wasn't in the mission, I don't think I've ever met a foundation that was so in that mission. They don't move outside of the mission.
Yeah.
So, but they would be great. It might be time to go back and talk.
Well, they've been a tremendous partner to us. And I think certainly given that our network was created by a mandate of Congress and that the act is sitting there, that certainly complicates things as well in terms of other people easily integrating with us and changing how that data looks and moves.
Well, great. We'll look forward to that when we'll look for a date, and Kay will get together with a date. And then we just may have some open conversations as things go along. But it's great, again, seeing everybody midweek, sliding into the weekend shortly. I think there's the newsletter that's out there. So feel free to send that around. And we'll look forward to talking to everybody next week. Have a good one.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yep. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Stop recording.